Hello.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for asking.
And what did you want to talk about?
The question, for whatever reason, that I've been either getting at, like just randomly talking with people, and they're like, oh man, you go in there for a while, you go in for a float tank for a while, you must come out looking like a prune. Will my fingers look like raisins after a float?
Modern gravity.
What are a few wrinkly things?
So wrinkly things. One of those dogs with wrinkly faces.
That's a good one.
That's a good one. Your typical raisins and prunes and dates, but that's like
Typical fruits.
You can get into your typical dried fruits.
The blinds when it's windy or they just come out of the wash.
Most of my t-shirts,
Oh,
as I oftentimes
when you do your own laundry.
when I do my own laundry.
Yes. Crash test dummies
Yeah.
and the cars they're in
Yeah.
after they slam to the barricade.
Those
The
are
car
very
is pretty
wrinkly.
wrinkly too.
That's very wrinkly. The whole front is crumpled and wrinkly.
That's correct.
Yeah. And all those things are things you won't look like after a float, even if you go in for hours upon hours. Because we've been asked this question a lot, and we usually just respond with, it doesn't happen in a float tank, and we don't quite know why. So we'll get into some theories in a moment, but the breakdown, when you go into the lake, when you go into a pool, when you go into the bathtub, hot tub even, any type
Sauna.
does it happen in sauna?
If the sauna's full of water, it would.
And you're sweaty enough. Most of us know that after a few minutes, if you've been in there for 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe you've just been swimming around all afternoon, you'll come out and your fingers and your toes are gonna look like little prunes. If anybody knows the absolute certain reason for this happening, definitely share it below, because most of the stuff that I found, a lot of them are theories. The reason that this happens, one of the thoughts and theories is that when your hands and toes get submerged in water, it is an evolutionary trait that's happened that when the top, they say the top layer or two of skin will actually get wrinkly and longer than the subcutaneous layers, so that you have better gripping ability. And through some studies, they've found that when your fingers have a little wrinkle versus when it is a freshly dry hand and you try to pick something up, that the person with the more wrinkly hand has a 12% better grip on that object.
I think the name for that is actually anthropomorphosis. Anthropomorphosis.
Is that actually what it's called?
No, I just made that up.
Now, how does this have anything to do with floating? It has nothing to do with floating, because when you actually float, it doesn't happen. It's a really reasonable thing to think that if that happens when you go into a tub or any body of water, whether it be a lake or the ocean, and that always happens to our fingers, I think it's a really fair question or assumption to make when getting into a float tank. And so here's where we venture into the non-sciencey science theory, non-science, heavy on the non-science. There's been no studies to do with float tanks and wrinkly fingers. This is just us taking what we know about wrinkly fingers and have an entertaining way of answering people's question of, will I become a raisin after I float? So even though the answer is no, and we don't know specifically why a float tank doesn't do it, what are your initial thoughts on maybe a theory of why that doesn't happen?
Water density.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Okay, cool. The theory, as JP said, is the density of water is the only real difference between your bathtub water and a float tank, is that the float tank is, what do you say, like 28 to 30% salt?
A thick, luscious ocean of relaxation is what I actually described it as.
That needs to be on all of our marketing material.
Yeah, I know.
The thought would be, could it have something to do with salt water, the Epsom salt specifically, or could it have to do with just your body's nervous system reaction? All we know is you can float for a long time and you're never gonna have raisiny, pruny fingers.
You know what'd be wild?
What?
If when you go out of a float tank, like, you're so wrinkly, you come out looking like Deadpool. Your entire body.
Like your whole body?
Yeah.
That would be pretty wild, because since that doesn't happen in a bathtub and it would happen in a float tank.
And then we can hire people for horror movies, because that's how that would basically
Multiple
look.
revenue streams.
There you go.
Multiple revenue streams.
That's right.
There. If you had any other specific questions, and this was just such a mind-blowing experience for you that you want us to do more of these videos, and you had specific questions about floating or otherwise that you're interested in us making a video about, let us know in the comments. Get in touch with us. we'll think about it. We'll talk about it. Might organize it and make it happen. Until next time, see you later. And maybe one day in the future, there will be reasoning for this, or maybe there's somebody watching this who, for whatever reason, just like knows this, and they have some crazy, deep research literature that they can just bust out and be like, "Here's your answers, guys."
I hope it's
the whole
Neil
video
deGrasse.
you made was useless.
I hope it's Neil deGrasse Tyson.
That would be cool. I'm not sure how that would play out, but
Well,
maybe one day.
I'm sure that he watches our videos.
Yeah, I'm very sure.
Yeah.
Along with Sarah McLachlan.
What?
Yeah, I hope.